Shalom, everybody. Here is Rabbi Yehuda Glick from Jerusalem with our series of studies in the book, in the preparation lessons for Passover. Pesach, it's coming up, it's around the corner. And we are studying today. We will be dealing with the concept of Chametz and Matzah. We know that these are two major parts of the holiday of Passover. The obligation to eat matzah. As a matter of fact, Passover itself has many commandments. Many commandments. I would say that many of them are around eating. But if we are a little more focused, we will see that the obligations, the commandments of this holiday have to do with a specific kind of food. A specific kind of food, and that is grain. This holiday in the Torah, it's called Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzot. I'm reading, for instance, in the book of Exodus, chapter 23. In the book of Exodus, chapter 23, we see that the holiday is called, I'm reading chapter 23, verse 15 or 14. There are 3 holidays in the year. And verse 15, Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzah. You keep for 7 days, you should eat Matzah. The same name is given to this holiday in Leviticus 23. Also exactly the same exact name, Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzot. I'm reading in chapter Leviticus 23, verse 6. On the 15th day of this month, is Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzot. So the very official name of this holiday is called Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of Matzot. The commandments around this holiday have to do with the grain. As I said, there's an obligation to eat matzah. We have to eat matzah 7 days of this first month of the year. 7 days you're eating matzah. But not only is the matzah to do with the grain, we have a ban on grain. What kind of grain? Chametz, leavened bread or leavened dough. You're not allowed to eat. Not only are you not allowed to eat, let's read what the Torah tells us about the leavened bread on the holiday of Chag HaMatzot. I'm reading in chapter Exodus 12, verse 15. 7 days you shall eat matzot, but on the first day, you have to remove any kind of leaven from your house. Anybody who eats chametz will be cut off the congregation of Israel. But not only that, in verse 19, Shiv'at Yamim, 7 days, you're not even allowed to have bread existing in your house, leavened bread existing in your house, for 7 days. So we see you're not allowed to eat leavened bread. You're not allowed to enjoy leavened bread. You're not allowed to have it existing in your house. I would say the verse in Deuteronomy is even more radical. In the Deuteronomy 16, we have the mitzvah, the obligation of matzot. In verse 4, Deuteronomy 16, verse 4, you're not even allowed to see. So we have an obligation to eat matzah, and we have Shalom from Peru, Puerto Rico, Enid Quetel. Shalom. Thank you for joining us. So we have a mitzvah, we have an obligation to eat matzah, and we also have an obligation not to eat chametz. But not only do we have an obligation not to eat chametz, we have very radical mitzvah here. The radical mitzvah of destroying the chametz. We burn the chametz. We're not allowed to see it. We're not allowed to eat it. We're not allowed to have any connection to the chametz. The chametz is totally bound. It's totally banned from our entire property. We're not allowed to have any chametz. We have to destroy all the chametz. So we see the thing here is very radical. We have to eat matzah. 7 days you eat matzah, and also 7 days you're not allowed to have any chametz existing in your possession whatsoever. You have to destroy the chametz. You have to remove it from your possession. You're not allowed to see it. You're not allowed to have the very existence. So, very interesting that the exact same ingredients, flour and water, consist of chametz and consist of matzah. One of them you have an obligation to eat, and the other one you have you're forbidden to eat. You're not even allowed to have it existing in your possession. This question becomes even more strong when you want to understand this, because the grain is totally permitted all year round. You can eat grain as much as you want all year round. Suddenly, surprisingly, comes Passover, the grain becomes one of the most strict bans, limitations, prohibitions existing, that you're totally disconnected from the community if you eat it. And at the same time, we see that there's a mitzvah, there's an obligation to eat the matzah. I would say that beyond that, matzah is the only kind of food, the only obligation to eat something specific in the entire Torah is the mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach. The obligation to eat matzah on Pesach is the only time the Torah specifically tells us we have to eat something. So we want to summarize what we've spoken about till now. On Passover, we have two major obligations that have to do with grain. Both of them have to do with grain, the same grain which you're permitted to eat all year round. One of them is you have to eat matzah. You must eat matzah. And the other one is you're not allowed to have any connection to chametz, to leavened bread. You're not allowed to see it. You're not allowed to existing in your possession. You have to destroy it and remove it from your house, and totally disconnect yourself from chametz. So we have to really understand and try to really understand what is the reasoning, what is the basis of this law, that the chametz is such a radical ban, such a prohibition on Pesach, and why is it a mitzvah, an obligation to eat matzah, and both of these things made of the same ingredients. Now we would say that the answer to this question, on a basic reason, is explained in the Torah. We know that the Torah, in chapter 12 in Exodus, in verse 34, the Torah tells us that when the people of Israel were escaping from Egypt, Vayisa ha'amed b'tzeko, the people carried their dough, terem yechmat, before it became leaven, and Bnei Israel, what did they do? They had to run away. They had to escape, and they didn't have time. Verse 39, Vayofu et habatzek, and they baked the dough, asher hotziu mitzrayim, which they took out of Egypt. Ugot matzot, they prepared matzah. Why? Kilo chametz, because there was not chametz, because they could not eat it, because they were just kicked out of Egypt. Elo yachlu leitma'ameh, they didn't have time. So the Torah explains that the reason you have to, we're not allowed to eat chametz on Passover, is because when the people of Israel came out of Egypt, they had to run, they had to escape very fast. They didn't have time to make the dough to rise. They didn't have time to make chametz, to make bread, so they ate matzah. But I would say this is very, very strange. First of all, it doesn't explain why is such. Okay, so they didn't have time to prepare matzah. So why, till this very day, do we have to not eat chametz? And such radically, you're not allowed to have it existing in your possession. You have to burn it. You have to destroy it. You have to get rid of it. It's not allowed to be existing there. You're not allowed to see it. I mean, the very fact that the historical event that when they left Egypt, they could not eat leavened bread because they were in a rush, doesn't really explain why is the obligation so radical that to the point that you're not allowed to eat the chametz, you don't have any pleasure with the chametz, it has to be totally destroyed, removed from your possession. This cannot be explained just by the coincidence event that when they left Egypt, they didn't have time to bake the matzah. Aside from this, we know that the story of the leaving of Egypt and the dough not becoming chametz appears in Exodus 12, 34, and 39. But the commandment of not having chametz, and the commandment of eating matzah already appears before that. We see that already in the verse 19, which is almost 15, 20 verses earlier. It already says that you're not allowed to eat chametz. The Torah already tells us you're not allowed to eat chametz. So how can you say that the reason they were not allowed to eat chametz is because they had to run away from Egypt and they didn't have time. They were in a big rush and they didn't have time for their dough to be prepared. How can you say that's the reasoning of the not eating chametz if the Torah already tells us before that they're not allowed to eat chametz and they have to eat matzah? So what we have to say is actually the opposite of what we said. That means not that the reason we have to eat matzah and the reason we're not eating chametz is because they were rushing and they didn't have time, but vice versa. We have to say that because God wanted us to eat matzah and God wanted us not to eat chametz in these days, He made sure the historical event would be that the escape from Egypt would be in a rushing situation. So again, we have to ask, and the major question that we're trying to discuss in this lesson is, why is there such that why is the prohibition so radical that you're not allowed to see it, you have to destroy it, you have to totally remove it from your possession. It's not allowed to be existing in your possession. And the second question is, why do we have an obligation to eat matzah? And why the same exact ingredient, which throughout the whole year round is permitted to eat, why, when it comes to Pesach, is it prohibited to have it existing in your possession, and why is it so radically forbidden, the chametz? We should point out that the connection to the exodus from Egypt to the grain doesn't begin in the exodus from Egypt. Actually, the entering to Egypt also was connected with grain. The connection to the entrance to Egypt, it began from grain. If we all recall, the going down to Egypt began with the dreams of Joseph. Joseph dreams about the grain. I want to take you back to the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, in chapter 37, we recall that Joseph saw in his dreams, he saw two dreams. The first dream, that he and his brothers were working in the field, and each one of them had this pile of grain, and their piles prostrated, bowed down to his pile. So we see that the very beginning of the whole story of going into Egypt begins with the grain. Joseph is sold to Egypt while his brothers are sitting down to eat bread, as is described exactly in the book of Genesis. We say in chapter 37, it says in verse 25, they took him, they threw him into the pit. The pit was empty with no water. In verse 25, Vayeshvu lechol lechem, and they sit down to eat bread. So the beginning of Joseph's story begins with his dream of the grain. He is sold to Egypt when his brothers are sitting down to eat bread. What happens to Joseph in Egypt? In Egypt, we recall, Joseph is put into jail. He's put into the pit. In the pit, he meets two ministers. And the two ministers have a dream. And what are the dreams of the baker? Of course, he has a basket of baked goods, probably bread, on his head. And Joseph is the one to solve this dream. So here we see also the dreams of the ministers of Pharaoh have to do with bread. Joseph becomes great, as you all know also before. And what does it say? Joseph's boss, Potiphar, gives him and makes him in charge of everything in the house. Here it says, and he's in charge of everything except for the bread that he eats. We'll read exactly where it says it. We're talking about Genesis 39, and it says, here we can see, in verse 6, he left everything in the hand of Joseph. He didn't know anything was going on except for the bread that he was eating. So Joseph's whole story, his whole life, begins with his dream of the grain. His brothers sell him to Egypt while they're sitting and eating bread. In Egypt, he becomes in charge of the minister's house, except for the bread. He's put into jail. In the jail, he meets the two ministers, and one of them dreams of bread. But even Joseph's coming out of jail comes. When does that happen? When he manages to solve the dreams of Pharaoh. And what were the dreams of Pharaoh? Are also two dreams. One of them dealing with the cows, and one of them dealing with the grain. And then, what is the solution? The solution is collect grain for the state of Egypt. And Joseph becomes a leading figure in Egypt, and he's the one in charge of all the bread and all the grain of Egypt. And when there's a total hunger, there's totally a situation of hunger all over the Middle East, Joseph is in charge of bread for all the people. So we see, not only is the exodus from Egypt to do with the bread and the grain when they were preparing their matzah and they couldn't have time to prepare leavened bread, but even the going into Egypt begins with the grain, and it continues on throughout the whole entire last few chapters of the book of Genesis, where all the way we can see, for instance, I will read in Genesis 47, what exactly is Joseph's job. Joseph is giving, verse 11, Joseph settles his father and his brothers in Egypt, and he gives each one of them bread, each one according to what he needs. And there's no bread all over because of total hunger in the country of Egypt, but Joseph is in charge of the bread. And we see that Joseph is in charge of the bread, and what we see, and we're not surprised, that the grain is a central part of not only the celebrating of the exodus from Egypt, but the whole exile to Egypt has, from the very beginning, from the dreams of Joseph, all the way to the exodus, has to do with grain. So we still have to understand, what is this coming to teach us? What is the concept we're supposed to be learning here? So I just want to once again summarize what we said until now. We saw on Passover there's a radical law, a prohibition against chametz, leavened bread. We see there's a mitzvah, an obligation to eat matzah, which is the same ingredients. We also see that the prohibition against chametz is very, very radical. Nothing like it. You're not allowed to see it. It's not allowed to exist anywhere. You have to totally remove it from your house. We also see that there's the only mitzvah ever in the Torah to eat something specific, is the mitzvah of eating matzah. We said that we tried to explain the matzah and the chametz by explaining that when they left Egypt, they didn't have time to bake the matzot. We saw that that can't be the explanation, because first of all, we said it's not reasonable that this would be an explanation of a law so radical that you're not allowed to eat chametz and you have to destroy it. We also saw that the Torah already commands about eating matzah and the not eating chametz before the Exodus. So how can we say that this would be the reasoning? We then saw that the whole process of not only the Exodus from Egypt, but the entering to Egypt, the going down to Egypt, from Canaan to Egypt, has to do with the grain. Beginning at the dreams of Joseph, the selling of Joseph while his brothers were eating bread, the job that Joseph was in charge of the house of the minister, except for the bread. He's put into jail. The two ministers, one of them dreams about his bread. He's taken out of jail because of solving the dreams of Pharaoh. And there he becomes in charge of the bread of everybody, both of his family and of all of the Egyptians. He's in charge of the grain. So we see that the whole story of Egypt has to do with the grain until the exit from Egypt. So if we see so far the grain, the bread, the Chametz, the Matzah, take such a very important position in the holiday of Passover, and we saw that it didn't only begin from the moment they left Egypt, but it covers the whole story of the exodus from Egypt. We have to try to find what is the significance of these facts. What is the significance of these facts? And to explain to us the understanding of the holiday of Passover. We have to widen our perspective on the whole idea of bread, of grain in general. And the way to do it is actually to return to the beginning of where the Torah first teaches us all about what grain is about, what bread is all about. Where do we find bread, the eating of bread, for the first time in the Torah? And the answer is, of course, in the Garden of Eden. I want to take you back to the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve eat from the fruit of the tree of wisdom of good and bad they're not supposed to eat from. One of the punishments that Adam receives, and I'm reading in the book of Genesis, chapter 3, I'm reading in verse 19, Bezeat apecha tochal lechem. You're going to eat bread from the sweat of your face until you return to the land from there you were taken, because you are dust of the earth, and to there you will return. So here's the first time the eating of bread is mentioned in the Torah, is the curse that Adam receives, that because he listened to his wife and he ate from the fruits of the tree of wisdom, the good and bad, he is punished that he will have to work hard to get his bread. And not only that, it says the whole land, the whole earth is cursed because of you. You will eat it in sadness the rest of your life. It will grow thorns, and you will be eating bread with the sweat of your face. Interesting enough that from the very first time bread is mentioned in Torah, the thing that is emphasized more than anything. Shalom, Keitha Harris. Welcome. Great to see you with us. From the very first time bread is mentioned in the Torah, its characteristics is the fact, the difficulty to produce it. This difficulty on achieving bread does not only characterize the years of hunger. Shalom, Keti. Shalom, Oleg. Shalom to everybody. We miss you all. Thank you for joining us on our special Torah teaching towards Passover on the significance of Chametz and Matzah. So we said what we're discussing right now is the first time the Torah just mentions bread, deals with the difficulty to achieve bread. And this difficulty is not only in years of hunger. This difficulty is on a regular basis, on an every single day basis, where a person's food is not ready for him in the tons and the millions. He has to work hard to achieve his bread. This difficulty became innovated in the world after Adam eats from the tree. This is a punishment to Adam for eating from the tree, and from then on, he has to work hard to achieve his bread. Not only does Adam curse, the earth is cursed, as it says in Genesis 3, verse 17. And to Adam he says, because you listened to your wife and you ate from the tree I told you not to, Arura Adama, the land itself, the earth itself is cursed, and you will eat the grass of the field. You will work hard to eat your bread until you return back to the earth that you were taken from. And here what we see, that the new message that Adam receives is that the way he gets his bread, the land is cursed, and from now on, achieving bread, achieving food is a difficult process. Not only that, from now on, even the punishment of death that God announced in the very beginning when he said, if you eat from that tree, you will be punished with death. This is mentioned only here when God says to him, you will have a hard time to eat bread until you return to the earth you were taken from. The very fact that the punishment of man has to do mainly with the way he's going to achieve his food is, of course, can be explained as God's punishment. You sinned by eating. You ate something I told you not to eat, and therefore your punishment will be to do with your eating. And exactly as it says in the Torah, we'll read again these sentences. Ule Adam amar, and to the man he said, and to Adam he said, Ki shamata lekol ishtecha, because you listened to your wife, vatochal, and you ate from the tree I told you, lo tochal menu. You ate from the tree I told you don't eat from. Therefore, the land is cursed. Be'itzavon tochalena. So again and again and again, the repetition is of the word le'echol, to eat. God says, because you ate, you're going to be punished by the way you're eating. And therefore, we see here the connection between the sin and the punishment. But of course, the bread we meet is only in the punishment. We do not hear about it before the sin, only after the sin. When we read the curse, which says that from now on, the bread you will be achieving will be through sweat. The question we want to ask to ourselves is what happened before that? What was the situation before the sin? How did man achieve his bread before the sin? Did man eat bread before the sin without having to work hard? Or did he eat only fruit? And maybe he didn't need bread at all. It's interesting that our scholars teach us, very interestingly, in the Talmud, according to one of the opinions, Rabbi Yehuda says, listen carefully, very interesting, listen very carefully what Rabbi Yehuda says, Ilan she'achal Adam mimenu, the tree that Adam ate from, chita haita, it was a tree of wheat. Did you hear it carefully? Not an apple tree, not an orange tree, not a pomegranate tree. Rabbi Yehuda says the tree was a tree of wheat. Meaning that Adam not only ate by eating and was punished by eating, but he ate wheat and the punishment was by wheat. And we see it here. Rabbi Yehuda was identifying the tree of the tree of wisdom, good and bad, as the wheat. Brings us to a new understanding of what wheat is, different than what we understand until now. Because, what does it say? It says that why did Shalom Gerson from Brazil, thank you so much for the power. We're studying here now about Chametz and Matzah. We are right now studying the verses of the eating and the sin of Adam in the Garden of Eden. And look what we see. Why did Eve eat from the tree? She said, she looked at the tree, and it says, I'm reading to you now. Excuse me. I'm saying it reads from what excuse me. What it says here that when Eve wanted to eat, listen what it says. She looked at the tree. She looked at the tree, and what did she see? In chapter 3 and in Genesis verse 6, and the Vatera Haisha, and the woman saw, Ki tov ha'etz l'ma'achal, the tree is beautiful for eating. Ta'avahu la'inayim, it's a lust for the eyes. Nechmad ha'etz le'askil, it's so sweet for wisdom. Vatikach mi piryo, and she took its fruit and she ate it. What it says here, that the woman saw the tree, but that can't mean she saw wheat. Thank you, Perfect Torah of Shalom from Germany. Thank you so much from Germany. So Eve saw the fruits of the tree and she ate them. How can we say such a thing? on grain that doesn't really fit. The whole story of the sin of man talks about trees, not about pits and about seeds and about grain. It talks about tree. But if we listen carefully to what Rabbi Yehuda is teaching us, he's teaching us that yes, there was a change in the situation. Before the sin, if we identify the tree as a tree of wheat, it means that in the Garden of Eden, the wheat grew on a tree. Shalom Rivka from Jacksonville. Listen carefully. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the wheat before Adam and Eve ate from the tree grew on a tree. And the fruits were not seeds. The fruits were freshly, hot, baked bread. Try to imagine this. You wake up and you see a tree. And what's growing on the tree? Fresh loaves of bread. I don't know if it was rolls, whole wheat or not whole wheat. But it was growing fresh bread. And all they had to do was to pick the bread off and eat it. It was fresh like anything. And this is what rose the lust, the temptation of Eve when she saw it. So what we see here, according to Rabbi Yehuda in the Talmud, the eating of the fruit from the Eitz Hadat, from the tree of wisdom, good and bad, actually led a total revolution in the world in the situation of the wheat. The wheat, which was once a tree, became a small weed. It became a small kind of grass. And the fruit turned from a loaf of bread to a seed. So here we can understand what the Torah is telling us in Genesis 3, verse 17. Not only was Adam cursed, but the Adamah, the land, was cursed. And it doesn't refer only to the man himself. It refers to a change in the world of the wheat in the world. If in the beginning wheat grew on a tree, in the beginning wheat grew freshly made, and man didn't have to sweat to get the fruit, now what we see, there is a revolution in the world. From now on, man has to work hard to prepare his bread. From now on, the sweat it needs from man to achieve his bread has also an actual positive impact on the change it had in the wheat, has a change on how man achieves his bread. I don't know why the stream is interrupted. I hope you're watching now. I hope you can see. From here, it looks like the stream is working. And thank you for those who were telling me that the stream was stopped. I'm continuing on. Anyway, so what we see here is unbelievable. What we're seeing right now is that bread before the sin was naturally growing on the tree of wheat. After the sin, the tree became grain growing on the ground, like the wheat we see now. From now on, what is that? What we have to understand? What does this fact teach us about the sin of eating from the tree of wisdom, good and bad? And now we'll maybe understand why this tree was forbidden on man to eat, and what does all this have to do with the commandments of Passover. I want to summarize what we said until now, and then we'll continue on. We started off saying that on Passover we have special obligations to do with grain. We had a mitzvah to eat matzah, but we saw of the same ingredients, the chametz, the unleavened bread, we have a mitzvah to not only not to eat it, but to destroy it, to remove it from our house. You're not allowed to see it. It's not allowed to exist in the house. You have to totally get rid of it. And we asked, how can something that all year round is permitted, suddenly on Pesach, it's a mitzvah to eat when it's in the form of matzah? It's forbidden so radically. The only mitzvah in the Torah ever to eat something specific is matzah. The only radical thing you have to totally destroy from your house is chametz. and we tried to figure out that. We also pointed out that the bread and the connection between grain is not only to the exodus from Egypt, which we saw we had to rush out of Egypt to prepare our matzot. We also saw that the bread has to do with the going down to Egypt. We saw that Joseph's dreams. Joseph was sold to Egypt when his brothers were eating bread. He was in charge of the minister's house, everything except for the bread. He was put into jail, and two ministers, and one of them dreamt about the bread. He was taken out of jail when Pharaoh dreamt about grain. He explained and expressed all of the idea of eating of the food of Egypt, and he was in charge of the bread of Egypt. And we saw, so the whole going down to Egypt, the exile to Egypt, had to do with the bread and the grain. And Joseph, who was in charge of the grain of Egypt, and he fed his family, he fed all the people of Egypt, all that had to do with the grain. We started looking at the origin of the very first time the Torah mentions bread. We saw that the very first time the Torah mentions bread, the emphasis is in the Garden of Eden, the punishment of man. What is bread all about? The difficulty to achieve it, the difficulty to produce it. All of that is what bread is all about, the difficulty to achieve it. We saw the very innovative the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that the tree of Eitz Hadat, the tree that was forbidden to eat, and the tree of wisdom, good and bad, it was a tree of wheat. And we saw that the punishment of man after the sin was not only punishment to man, but it was a total revolution in what happened to grain from before the sin to after the sin. It grew on a tree, loaves, hot, fresh loaves of bread, and after the sin, it became small little seeds. Now we're trying to get an understanding what all this is going to teach us. The sin of man from the very beginning was the sin of eating. Even though there are some other issues to do with even though there are other issues, excuse me, I'm sorry, there was a phone call that came in. Even though there are other issues to do with the Garden of Eden, we see that the sin was eating, and this is the simplest thing, and the punishment had to do with eating. And the very first sin in the world, the very first sin of humanity is I would say the model type of what sin is all about is eating. Why does eating play such a major role in mankind and identifying what man is all about? What we see is that eating is the basic idea of the whole story of the Garden of Eden. When God puts man into the Garden of Eden, he tells him two things. He tells him, you can eat, not you can, eat, please eat from all of the trees. It's exactly what God says to Adam when he's put into, I'm reading in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. And God took Adam, put him into the Garden of Eden, and told him, eat from all the trees of the garden, and from the tree of wisdom, good and bad, don't eat from it, because the day you will eat from it, you will die. So what we see here is the very concept of eating accompanies man from the day he was put in the Garden of Eden. And what we see here also is that the garden itself is described by a garden because of all the trees that are growing there. And man, what he has to do there is to eat from the trees. That is what man is supposed to do in the Garden of Eden. Eat from the trees. Eat from the trees. What happened? God wanted him to eat from the tree of eternal life. What does it mean to eat from the tree of eternal life? Man was put in the Garden of Eden, the garden of God, to be connected to God. Man was supposed to be directly connected to God from the very food he eats. He's supposed to eat and feel connected to God because this is the present he received from God. But what happened? We have to recall that eating has two parts of it. First of all, the nutrition. We need eating. Breathing, we do it automatically. But eating is something basic in our life. A baby who is born, the first thing he does on himself is eat. He eats from his mother. He nurses from his mother's milk. He's eating. That most of the time, what a baby is doing in his first stages of life is eating. And this is his connection to his mother. This is connection to man, to humanity, to God. We get our food from God. But eating has another part of it. When you eat something, you see the flavor, the taste, the smell, the looks. All of these play a major aspect in eating. And they're important. They give a good man a good enjoyment from the fact that he eats. But the question is, what is the most important and what is the less important? Shalom, Magdalena from New Mexico. Thank you for joining. The eating of a person is supposed to be to give him strength to worship God. Passover, which is the celebration in the spring, the celebration of the people of Israel when they were first born, the celebration of the people, the holiday of Passover is actually the birthday of the people of Israel as a nation. We are born, we were like in the womb of our, while we were in Egypt, coming out of the womb, we are born. And we are born to eat and be connected to God, to be connected to God. At that very moment, we have to remember what is the important part of life and what is the less important. If all you do when you eat is concentrate on the enjoyment of eating, you're missing out the whole concept of eating. Yes, you can enjoy it. You can eat and be eternally connected to God if you eat from the tree of life, which we were supposed to eat. But when you have good and bad mixed together, when you have the good and bad mixed together, the danger is you may see the less important part. When Eve ate from the tree, she looked at the beauty. She looked at how beautiful it was. She looked at the lust. She looked at the outside parts of it, and not on the nutrition and not on the connecting to God. On our holiday of Passover, when we are on the holiday of Passover, on the holiday of Passover, when we celebrate on the holiday of Passover, when we celebrate the birth of our nation, and the birth of our nation means becoming close to God, we have to differentiate between the kinds of eating we're eating. We want to eat to connect to God. We want to eat a food which gives us life to be close to God, to remember that God is the origin of life. We do not want to concentrate on the less important parts. The leavened bread has the beauty and the lust of it and the fun of eating, but it lacks the centerpiece. When we 7 days eat the matzah, we remind ourselves what is the most important part of eating. It is the eating of nutrition, to be able to survive and live under God's hands. And therefore, coming out of Egypt was based on the connection to the food, was based on the fact that we had to come out fast and we had to concentrate on the more important parts, which is the nutrition of the food, and not concentrate on the less important parts of food. We have to conclude this lesson already. I thought it would go. I would be able to teach more. But what we did see from here is that yes, God is teaching us to remember, whenever we eat, whatever we eat, everything we have to remember. The eating is to bring us living in God's capacity. We have to remind ourselves that we are here to serve Him. We can enjoy life. And the tree of wisdom is good and bad together. We have to try to see what are the most important sides of the life, the eating of the basic nutrition, and then we can go on in our life and really try to combine all the different things. Shalom to Oleg and shalom to Alf Kara. Shalom Dodi. Thank you to everybody for coming to listen to our lesson today. I will be loading this lesson onto my Facebook page. Thank you all for joining me. Tomorrow we will have another lesson to do with Passover. Shalom from Jerusalem. Please go into our website, shalomjerusalem.org. Go into our Facebook page, Shalom Jerusalem Foundation. Visit our page in our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go into our website, shalomjerusalem.org. Be connected to Shalom Jerusalem, because especially in these days, when we're all in the hands of God, we don't know what our future is all about. We have to remember that man was created to be a servant of God, to be connected, his life connected to God. I wish you all shalom, blessings from Jerusalem. Shalom to all.